The chandeliers of the Royal Opera House blazed like captive suns, casting their radiance upon a sea of silk and satin. London's most exalted names, powdered and perfumed, had gathered in tiers of gilt and velvet to witness not only the evening's performance but, as always, the endless theater of one another. Whispers moved swifter than the bows across strings. Reputations rose and crumbled beneath the flutter of fans and the narrowing of eyes. It was here, amid this glimmering temple of music and spectacle, that Lady Evelina Harcourt's name was to be written into scandal. She entered the box reserved for her father, Viscount Harcourt, with the composure of a woman bred to expectation. Her gown of dove-gray silk shimmered beneath the gaslight, its modest elegance a conscious defiance of the jeweled extravagances that surrounded her. Though still in her first London season, Evelina bore herself with a restraint that many mistook for hauteur, but those who watched closely saw instead the quiet fire that glowed behind her eyes. Her father, ever absorbed in debate at Parliament, had sent her accompanied only by her widowed aunt, whose devotion to society's chatter left Evelina largely unobserved. The Duke of Ashbourne had chosen this night for his pursuit. Tall, broad of shoulder, his dark hair cut to the mode, he possessed the kind of presence that commanded silence as he passed. Men deferred to him for his influence at court, women whispered of the fortune and title he represented. His lineage traced unbroken to Norman conquest, his estates stretched across counties, and his friendship with the Prince Regent lent him power beyond ordinary nobility. Yet despite his rank, it was his reputation for a will unyielding and a temper unsoftened by indulgence that made society regard him with awe and caution alike. Evelina had drawn his attention weeks earlier, not by coquettish glances or calculated graces, but by a steadfast refusal to play the expected games. At balls she danced sparingly. In conversation she spoke with a directness unclouded by vanity. When others fluttered and preened, she stood apart, her dignity like a pane of glass that neither invitation nor slight could shatter. To Ashbourne, accustomed to women who sought his notice, her indifference became a lure more powerful than any artful smile. Tonight, he resolved that indifference would end. The first act soared with the tragic melodies of Rossini, yet for many in attendance the greater drama unfolded in the Harcourt box. At the close of an aria, when applause cascaded through the hall, the Duke stepped inside unannounced, his presence filling the confined space with both warmth and tension. Evelina rose instinctively, her fan snapping shut in her hand, her expression poised between courtesy and alarm. "My lady," he murmured, bowing with the correctness of custom, though his eyes lingered upon her with unmistakable possession. "I find myself most fortunate to encounter you here, though fortune is seldom so gracious without intent." Evelina inclined her head, her voice calm. "Your Grace honors us. My aunt will be gratified by such company." Her aunt, oblivious to undertones, beamed with flustered delight, fluttering her hand as though to encourage conversation. Ashbourne, however, scarcely glanced at her. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a pitch that reached Evelina alone. "Lady Evelina, London tires me with its artifice. I would have one honest companion amid the masquerade. You, I think, are that rare soul." She stiffened, her fingers tightening upon her fan. "Your Grace mistakes my silence for invitation. I am not accustomed to such direct approaches." "Then accustom yourself," he said, the words velvet yet edged with steel. He reached for her hand, not with the idle gallantry of a dance request, but with an ownership that disregarded spectators. Gasps rose from the neighboring box, carried swiftly as rumor always does. Evelina's cheeks flamed, yet she did not retreat. In that moment, with the weight of every eye upon her, she understood that submission would render her another ornament in his collection. To defy him was to court peril, yet her pride, fierce, uncompromising, would not yield. She withdrew her hand with deliberate slowness, her gaze unflinching. "Your Grace presumes much," she said, her voice carrying farther than she intended, resonating into the sudden hush of the audience around them. I am not a prize to be claimed in so public a fashion. If you wish to converse, do so with courtesy, not conquest. The opera's stage fell momentarily irrelevant. Heads turned, whispers surged like an incoming tide. A lady had rebuked a duke, and not in private, but before the keenest eyes of London. The affront could not have been sharper had she struck him. Ashbourne's jaw tightened, though his expression retained its mask of composure. Slowly, he bowed, his movements measured, concealing the tempest that threatened beneath. "As you will, my lady," he replied, his tone soft enough to escape the gallery but not her ears. "Yet remember, defiance is not without consequence." He released her, retreating with the grace of a man who yields only outwardly. The air in the Harcourt box seemed to thin once he was gone, though Evelina stood unshaken, her fan motionless in her grip. Around her, the audience's murmurs swelled into speculation. Some admired her courage, others condemned her folly. Her aunt's cheeks flushed crimson, her lips moving with frantic attempts at explanation to those who peered in. Evelina herself remained silent, though within her chest her heart beat like a drum. Below, the orchestra resumed, strings rising to meet the soprano's lament, but Evelina scarcely heard the notes. The Duke's warning echoed louder than any aria. She had humiliated him, and in so doing, placed herself in the path of his pride. Society might forgive a lady's indiscretion, but few forgave a woman's boldness, least of all a man unaccustomed to refusal. Yet for all the peril, Evelina felt an unexpected exhilaration. To meet his gaze and not falter, to reclaim her hand and her dignity in full view of those who would gladly see her stumble, this, too, was a triumph. Still, she knew the Duke of Ashbourne was not a man to forget an affront. His retreat was not surrender, but delay. As the act concluded, and applause thundered once more through the grand hall, Evelina lowered herself into her seat with composure intact, though her pulse betrayed the storm within. She had won this moment, but in the silence between notes she felt the weight of battles yet to come. For the Duke's last words, whispered with quiet finality, clung to her like smoke. A promise, or perhaps a threat, defiance carries its price, And as the curtain rose again, casting light upon the tragedy upon the stage, Evelina Harcourt sensed her own drama had only begun. The scandal born at the opera did not fade with the lowering of its curtains. By morning, the tale had traveled from the lips of matrons in carriages to the ink-stained pages of the city's gossip sheets. Names were not printed, for libel was dangerous, but the allusions were sharp enough that no reader of fashion could fail to recognize the lady of noble blood who had spurned a duke before the glittering assembly of London. Coffee-houses hummed with speculation, and parlors brimmed with the thrill of scandal. Lady Evelina Harcourt's name, once spoken with mild curiosity, was now uttered with a mixture of admiration and alarm. Her act of defiance made her both heroine and fool, depending upon which drawing-room one entered. Evelina herself felt the sting of this new attention most keenly. Invitations that had been so eagerly pressed upon her only a week before began to thin. Gentlemen who had half declared intentions to call upon her grew suddenly reticent. Young ladies of her acquaintance greeted her with overbright smiles that concealed a quiet relish in her predicament. Only her father, absorbed in Parliament's debates over foreign policy, seemed unaware of how swiftly his daughter's standing in society tottered. Evelina endured each whisper with composure, though the heat beneath her skin betrayed the humiliation she dared not show. Yet she told herself she would not regret. To have yielded would have been a betrayal of her own soul. The Duke of Ashbourne, meanwhile, did not behave as society expected of a man thus affronted. He did not withdraw into cool disdain, nor did he spread bitter word of her insolence. Instead, his silence unnerved her more than anger might have done. For nearly a week she heard nothing of him, and she allowed herself to hope that his pride had driven him elsewhere. That hope faltered when, one damp morning, a parcel arrived at her father's townhouse, delivered not by footman but by a liveried messenger bearing Ashbourne's crest. Within the parcel lay a book, its leather cover worn with the patina of time. It was a volume of Milton, the title in gilt lettering faded with age. Evelina turned its pages with wary hands, uncertain of his intent. Then, in the margin of Paradise Lost, she found a note inscribed in a fine, slanting hand. *, there are many forms of rebellion, my lady. Some damn, and some redeem. Which, I wonder, do you seek? *. Her breath caught, for the words were no accident. They hinted at knowledge she had guarded more carefully than her reputation. Beneath the mask of dutiful daughter and silent lady, Evelina had indeed lived a double life. Through her father's reformist acquaintances she had grown sympathetic to the abolitionist cause. With quiet cunning she carried messages hidden in ribbons, passed letters disguised as invitations, and smuggled pamphlets in reticules. She did not wield sword or vote, but in her small defiance she felt herself part of something vast and necessary. That the Duke might suspect, or worse, know, chilled her blood. At the next assembly she attended, her fears were confirmed. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, their light catching in the crystals of decanters and the sequins sewn upon gowns. Evelina had resolved to keep to the edges, to dance only when pressed. Yet scarcely had she taken one step into the room than Ashbourne appeared before her, bowing with practiced grace, his eyes fixed on hers. "Lady Evelina," he said, his voice low but rich enough to reach beyond her ears, "it is my hope you found the gift to your taste." She inclined her head with cool restraint. "Your Grace overwhelms me. A volume of Milton is not a token lightly given." His smile was slight, unreadable. Milton understood that to defy is not always to sin. There are chains more binding than those of heaven or earth. Do you not agree? Her fan trembled in her hand, though she masked it with a flick to her shoulder. "I am not accustomed to speaking of such weighty matters at a ball." "Then perhaps we should speak elsewhere." His words were smooth, but the command beneath them was unmistakable. Before she could respond, another couple pressed between them, the music swelling, dancers whirling. When Evelina turned, he was gone into the crowd, leaving her shaken yet unbowed. By the following morning, rumor took on a new life. Whispers claimed that Ashbourne had been seen leading her into the gardens of Lady Blackwood's soiree, though Evelina knew she had scarcely left her aunt's side that night. Still, in the fertile soil of gossip, truth mattered little. Her aunt confronted her in breathless horror. "Child, you must be cautious. Your name cannot endure another breath of impropriety." Evelina gave only quiet assurances, though inwardly her anger burned. To be both blameless and accused, both innocent and condemned, was a cruelty known only to women of her station. At last her resolve broke into action. The next evening, she encountered the Duke once more at a dinner party where the candles smoked thickly above the table and laughter clashed with the clink of silver. When the company rose to disperse into drawing-rooms, she seized the moment. Slipping past curious eyes, she followed Ashbourne into a dim corridor lined with portraits. There, away from the noise, she confronted him. "You play a dangerous game, Your Grace," she said, her voice scarcely above a whisper, yet sharp as glass. "Sending tokens, sowing rumors. What is it you seek of me?" He turned, the candlelight glinting against the severe line of his cheek. "What I seek?" His tone was amused, yet his eyes held a gravity that unsettled her. "Truth, Lady Evelina. You carry it like contraband, and I would know its shape." Her pulse thundered, but she met his gaze steadily. "If you know something of me, then you know also the peril I face should it be spoken aloud. Will you be my betrayer?" He stepped closer, so near that she caught the faint scent of sandalwood. "No. Betrayal is not my aim. But silence is not without cost. Tell me, what will you trade for my discretion?" Evelina's throat tightened, her pride battling the instinct to plead. She forced herself to lift her chin. "Your silence is worth nothing if it must be bought. Keep it freely, or make of me your enemy." For a heartbeat he regarded her, expression unreadable. Then his lips curved into something that was neither smile nor sneer. Enemy, ally, or something between, time will tell. But know this, my lady, you are far too intriguing for silence to last. The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke the moment. Evelina turned swiftly, rejoining the company before eyes could notice her absence. Her heart raced, yet she forced her face into serenity. The evening drew on with music and chatter, but beneath her calm surface she trembled with the knowledge that she had crossed into dangerous territory. The Duke's words echoed, not merely threat but promise. He had glimpsed her secret, and instead of exposing her, he sought to draw her deeper into his orbit. When she finally returned home, the city slumbering beyond the carriage window, Evelina leaned her head against the glass. She had confronted him, yes, but in doing so had bound herself further into his attention. Her defiance, which once shielded her, now seemed to fan the fire of his pursuit. And as the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, she admitted what she had most dreaded. This duel of wills was no longer only about pride or dignity. The Duke of Ashbourne had fixed his gaze upon her, and he did not appear to be a man inclined to relent. The night of Lady Greville's winter ball was bitterly cold, the frost glittering upon carriage lanterns like powdered diamonds. Inside the mansion, however, warmth and grandeur reigned supreme. Musicians filled the air with waltzes, and the assembly hall shimmered with gilded mirrors and rows of candles whose flames cast a golden sheen upon jewels and silks. Evelina moved through the throng with her habitual composure, though her heart bore the weight of unease. She knew the Duke of Ashbourne was present. She had felt his eyes upon her even before she had seen him. He did not pursue her in open view, nor did he join her for a dance. Instead, he lingered at the edges, his presence like a shadow that lengthened wherever she turned. By the second set, Evelina could bear no more of the silent pursuit. Slipping away from her aunt's side, she passed through a side corridor lined with statues of marble gods. She needed a breath of solitude, though solitude was precisely what she would not find. For in the dimness of the library beyond, the Duke stood waiting, as though her flight had been preordained. The fire in the grate illuminated him in shades of amber and shadow, lending him the aspect of some implacable sentinel. "Your Grace," she began, her voice low yet steady, "you place yourself in my path with design. What is it you intend?" He did not bow, nor offer the civility expected. Instead, he regarded her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through every layer of her composure. "I intend," he said slowly, "to know you. Not the mask you wear before society, but the truth you conceal. Tell me, Lady Evelina, why does rebellion gleam in your eyes?" Her breath caught. She had prayed he would remain ignorant, that his notes and hints were but games of a powerful man. Yet now, before the steady blaze of his stare, she could no longer pretend. "You speak in riddles, Your Grace," she replied, though the tremor in her tone betrayed her. He stepped nearer, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "No riddle. I have seen the signs. The hurried glances exchanged with certain gentlemen at assemblies. The way your reticule is ever heavy, yet empties after you leave some discreet corner. Do not mistake me, I admire boldness. But boldness without caution is peril. Tell me the truth, or I may be compelled to draw my own conclusions." Evelina turned her face away, her fan pressed to her lips as though it could guard her secrets. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. At last she whispered, "If you know this much, then you know also that my safety, and more importantly, the safety of others, rests upon your silence. Yes, Your Grace, I have lent my hands to the cause of abolition. I have carried letters, passed messages, aided those who seek to undo the chains that bind men in distant colonies. It is not vanity, but conviction. I could not do otherwise and still live with myself." For a long moment he said nothing. Evelina braced herself for condemnation, or worse, the cold amusement of a man who now held her future in his grasp. But when he spoke, his tone was different than she had expected, less the voice of a duke commanding obedience, more the voice of a man remembering an old wound. My mother, he said, his eyes fixed on the fire, was not the woman the world believed her to be. Her portrait still hangs at Ashbourne Hall, painted fair and pale. But the artist's brush lied at my father's command. She was of mixed blood, the daughter of a merchant and a woman from the Indies. My father concealed it, for his rank could not suffer scandal. He loved her, perhaps, but he loved his title more. And so I grew in the shadow of a truth that could never be spoken. Do you understand me now? When I say I do not condemn you, it is because I, too, am a child of secrets. Evelina turned toward him, her astonishment softening into something more tender. In his confession she heard not only truth, but a loneliness akin to her own. She had not expected to find common ground with the very man who threatened to expose her. Yet here, in the glow of the library, their guarded lives overlapped in startling intimacy. She lowered her fan, her voice gentler. Then you know the cost of silence and the burden of concealment. If you betray me, you betray also the memory of the woman who gave you life. Ashbourne's lips curved, not in mockery but in something nearer to sorrow. Betray you? No, Evelina. My silence is assured. But know this, once shared, secrets are no longer solitary. By speaking, you have bound me to you, whether you wished it or not. The word struck her with a force beyond their sound. Bound, such a word carried weight, both dangerous and consoling. She searched his face for deception, but found only sincerity, fierce and unyielding. And though fear still coiled in her chest, something else stirred too, a reluctant trust, fragile as spun glass. Ashbourne reached into his coat and drew forth a small object wrapped in linen. He placed it upon the table between them, then withdrew his hand. Evelina unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver locket, tarnished with age. Within lay the miniature of a woman with kind eyes, painted in muted colors. My mother's, he said simply. I offer it not as ornament, but as testament. Let it remind you that truth, however concealed, endures. And let it stand as proof that I am no enemy to your cause. Evelina closed the locket gently, her throat tight with emotion. She could not accept such a gift without acknowledging what it meant. A pledge of trust, a fragment of his most private history placed in her keeping. For a moment words deserted her, and only the sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. At last she spoke, her voice hushed. You give me more than I can repay. But if you truly know what it costs to be defiant, then do not tempt me further with promises I dare not believe. Ashbourne's gaze held hers, unwavering. It is because I know the cost that I cannot turn away. Do not mistake my pursuit for idle conquest, Evelina. It is not your beauty alone that ensnares me, but your fire. A man may inherit power, but passion cannot be granted by birthright. You have both, and I find myself unable to let you go. The words trembled in the space between them, charged with meaning too great to dismiss. Evelina's composure threatened to fracture, yet she summoned her dignity once more, retreating a step toward the door. If you value my fire, then let it burn free. Do not seek to smother it with chains, however gilded. He inclined his head, though his eyes never left hers. Then let us see, my lady, whether flame consumes or illuminates. The choice may yet be ours to make. Evelina turned and slipped into the corridor, her breath unsteady, her hand clutching the locket concealed in her palm. Behind her, the fire continued to crackle, and with it the knowledge that her world had changed irrevocably. She had confessed, and he had answered not with betrayal but with revelation. Yet trust was a perilous gift, and love, if love it was becoming, still more perilous. As she rejoined the glittering throng of the ballroom, she knew the next act of their drama was already written in the unspoken promise of his gaze. The night of the Regent's ball was a spectacle without rival, a display of grandeur designed to remind the city that power was not merely exercised in Parliament but staged before society's gaze. The palace was ablaze with light, the chandeliers straining under the weight of crystal, the floors polished until they reflected the sweep of gowns and the gleam of boots. Nobility arrived in an endless procession, their jewels catching fire in the candlelight, their whispers forming a constant murmur beneath the music. It was a night when alliances were struck not by treaty but by glances, when a smile could secure fortune and a misstep condemn a family to ruin. Evelina entered with her aunt, her gown of ivory muslin embroidered in silver thread lending her an ethereal grace. Yet for all her poise, a storm brewed within her chest. She had shared her secret with Ashbourne, and he had given her his in return. Tonight, she feared, the fragile thread of that trust would be tested. The Duke was already in attendance, his tall frame unmistakable amid the throng. He moved with the authority of a man who did not seek admiration yet received it all the same. Courtiers clustered near him, men eager for his favor, women for his glance. But his gaze, when it swept the room, found Evelina with unerring certainty. She felt it like a touch, and her heart quickened against her will. He did not approach at once, nor make a scene, but she sensed his watchfulness, the tether that now bound them invisible yet unbreakable. The first half of the evening passed in a haze of music and introductions. Evelina danced only once, with a polite baronet, and even that brief engagement was spoiled by the awareness of Ashbourne's eyes upon her. When she sought refuge at the edge of the ballroom, she overheard the whispers that froze her blood. A knot of matrons spoke in lowered tones, their fans quivering with malice. It is said, one murmured, that Lady Harcourt lends her hand to dangerous causes. Letters, pamphlets, dealings most unladylike. The Duke himself may have uncovered such indiscretions. Another gasped, her pearls rattling at her throat. Surely not. And yet, where else would he spend his attentions if not to expose scandal? Their laughter was thin and cruel, and Evelina turned away with her dignity intact but her composure shaken. The rumors had spread farther than she feared. Someone, perhaps emboldened by envy or suspicion, had pieced together fragments of truth. If word reached the regent, her family's honor would crumble and her father's career would not withstand the disgrace. She knew Ashbourne could silence it, or he could destroy her. The thought was unbearable, and then, as though summoned by her dread, the Duke appeared at her side, offering his arm with impeccable formality. "Walk with me, Lady Evelina." She hesitated only a breath before placing her gloved hand upon his sleeve. He led her through the glittering throng, every eye upon them, until they reached the dais where the regent himself presided. The prince, corpulent and gleaming with rings, surveyed the pair with indulgent curiosity. "Ashbourne," he declared, his voice carrying, "and the Harcourt girl. What say you of these rumors I hear? Dangerous talk, is it not? One expects loyalty to crown, not sedition, especially from a lady." His words, though spoken with idle amusement, fell upon Evelina like stones. A hush rippled through the room, anticipation sharpened to a point. Ashbourne's pause was measured, deliberate. All eyes fixed upon him, waiting to see whether he would confirm or deny. Then, with the calm authority of a man accustomed to command, he spoke. "Your Royal Highness," he said, his voice resonant, "I will hear no such defamation against the lady who is soon to bear my name. Evelina Harcourt is beyond reproach, and I stake my honor, my fortune, and my title upon her virtue. Let no man or woman dare suggest otherwise." The proclamation struck like thunder. Gasps broke through the crowd, fans snapped shut in shock, and whispers surged anew. Evelina's heart stopped, her breath caught in her throat. He had done the unthinkable, claimed her before the regent and all of society, binding her reputation to his with an irrevocable vow. The prince, amused and mollified, laughed and waved his jeweled hand. "Very well, very well. Ashbourne always did know how to silence a room. Let us hear no more of such matters." The music struck up again, the ball resumed its gaiety, yet Evelina felt as though she stood upon a precipice. Later, when the corridors had emptied and the palace's gardens lay dark and fragrant under the night sky, Evelina confronted him. They stood beneath a marble archway, the air heavy with roses and the hush of fountains. Her eyes blazed, her voice low but fierce. "How dare you? You would bind me with words spoken not in private, but before the regent himself? You have stolen my freedom beneath the guise of protection." Ashbourne regarded her with that same unshakable composure, though in his eyes flickered something warmer, more turbulent. "I saved you, Evelina. Had I not spoken, the whispers would have become daggers. They would have carved your name into ruin. Now they dare not breathe against you." "Saved me?" She pressed a trembling hand to her breast. "You have made me your possession. You claim me as though I am property to be shielded or displayed. I did not ask for your intervention." His jaw tightened, his voice deepening. "No, you did not. But I could not stand by and see you undone. Do you not understand? I have power enough to silence them, but that power is nothing without you. Do not call it chains when it is a bond freely given." Her anger warred with the tremor in her heart. Every word he spoke carried both menace and tenderness, and she could not disentangle the two. She turned from him, her shoulders stiff with pride. "You speak of bonds, but to me they feel like shackles. I would rather risk ruin than live as a prize upon your arm." He stepped closer, his hand lifting but not daring to touch her. "And yet, Evelina, you are already bound to me. Not by proclamation, not by title, but by what passed between us in the library. You gave me your truth, and I gave you mine. That is not conquest, it is covenant." She closed her eyes, fighting the rush of emotion that threatened to unmake her composure. "If you speak true, then prove it. Prove that what you offer is not the gilded cage of society, but a partnership of equals." For the first time, his voice softened to a whisper stripped of command. "Then let me prove it, not with words, but with deeds. I will stand beside your cause, unseen yet unwavering. And if the world must think you mine to protect you, so be it. Better a chain of roses than a noose of scandal." Her breath trembled, her heart torn between defiance and longing. She could not forgive the boldness of his declaration, yet she could not deny the safety it had bought her. In the darkness, beneath the watchful silence of the garden, her tears fell silently, unseen but not unfelt. "You have bound me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Bound me in chains more binding than any law." Ashbourne's gaze softened, his hand finally brushing hers with reverence. "Then let me be the keeper who never lets you fall." The fountain's murmur filled the silence between them, and Evelina knew their fates were now entwined. Whether salvation or ruin awaited, the choice was no longer hers alone. The ball continued within, laughter and music masking the scandal that had just altered the course of her life. And as she stood in the garden's shadows, Evelina felt the first shiver of surrender, not of her will, but of her isolation. The days that followed the regent's ball were a blur of consequence. Society, ever eager for novelty, fixed its gaze upon Evelina with renewed intensity. No longer was she merely the viscount's daughter. She was the woman claimed by the Duke of Ashbourne in a declaration as bold as any Parliament speech. Invitations multiplied again, though now they were edged with curiosity rather than welcome. Some congratulated her with false warmth, others whispered of her audacity behind feathered fans. Yet in every room she entered, the same question shimmered unspoken: would she resist the Duke's claim, or submit to the destiny he had pronounced before them all? Evelina bore it with composure, though her nights were restless, haunted by the memory of his words in the garden, half promise, half command. Ashbourne himself remained as enigmatic as ever. He called upon her formally, but always with a courtesy that barely concealed the force of his will. When he spoke, it was with measured calm; when he looked at her, it was with the fire of a man unaccustomed to denial. Evelina sparred with him in conversation as deftly as she once parried gossip, yet beneath her defiance ran an undercurrent of something deeper. She could not forget the locket he had placed in her hand, nor the truth he had entrusted to her. In his presence, anger and longing braided together in ways that unsettled her. It was in this state of unease that her cause demanded her attention once more. A letter arrived, pressed into her hand by a servant loyal to her father's reformist allies. Its contents chilled her. A shipment of pamphlets exposing the cruelties of the slave trade had been seized by officials, and several men were in danger of arrest. Without intervention, the small network Evelina aided would be crushed, its leaders disgraced or imprisoned. Her instincts urged her to act, to pass messages, to rally support, but she knew too well that Ashbourne's watchful eyes might discern her every step. To move without his knowledge was to risk his wrath. To confide in him was to gamble with everything. That night, in her father's townhouse, Evelina lingered long in the drawing-room after her aunt retired. She held the letter in trembling hands, the firelight flickering across her face. When the door opened and Ashbourne himself entered, unannounced, unbidden, her breath faltered. He looked upon her with the calm of a man who knew his arrival required no explanation. "You are troubled," he said, his tone soft yet certain. "Do you think I cannot see it? What weighs upon you so heavily?" She tried to hide the letter, but his gaze had already caught it. "It is no matter for you, your grace. My burdens are my own." He crossed the room with measured steps, his presence filling the space as though the walls themselves bowed to him. "I told you, Evelina, your secrets are no longer solitary. Do not treat me as though I am your jailer. If you will not trust me, then what meaning had our confessions?" Her heart warred within her chest. At last, with a tremor of resignation, she placed the letter in his hand. He read swiftly, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening with thought. When he looked up, his expression bore neither shock nor condemnation, but something fiercer. "So this is the fire you carry," he said. "Not petty intrigue, but justice itself. Do you not see, Evelina? They would crush you not because you err, but because you dare. And dare you must. But not alone." She shook her head, fear rising like a tide. "If you involve yourself, you risk exposure. You risk the regent's favor, your title, your fortune. I cannot allow it." His hand closed over hers, strong and unyielding. "You mistake me. What I risk is nothing compared to what I gain. To stand beside you is not a burden, it is the only truth I have ever sought." In that moment, Evelina saw not the implacable Duke who had cornered her at the opera, but the man who bore his mother's hidden legacy with dignity, who carried within him a hunger for more than titles could grant. Her defiance wavered, not into surrender, but into recognition. For the first time she glimpsed the possibility of an alliance forged not by claim, but by choice. Together they devised a plan. Ashbourne, with his influence, would ensure the seized pamphlets vanished from official custody, redirected before they could be destroyed. Evelina, with her network, would see them spread anew. It was a perilous balance. One misstep and both their reputations would be ashes, but the danger bound them more closely than any declaration at a ball. In those clandestine hours, side by side in whispered counsel, Evelina discovered a partnership she had not believed possible. Yet the world beyond their alliance pressed hard against them. Rumors still swirled, and matrons sharpened their suspicions. Evelina's father, though absorbed in politics, began to hear murmurs that his daughter's name was entangled with Ashbourne's in ways that promised both elevation and ruin. The regent, fickle and vain, hinted at impatience for the formal announcement of betrothal, and Evelina herself felt the walls of choice closing tighter. The night of reckoning came swiftly. At a dinner attended by ministers and peers, a rival lord, long envious of Ashbourne's influence, rose to toast with poisoned words. "To the Duke," he declared, "and to the lady who tames him. May her passions prove no threat to crown and country." The silence that followed was cutting, all eyes darting between Ashbourne and Evelina. It was a challenge cloaked in civility, an accusation waiting to be answered. Ashbourne stood, his glass steady in his hand, his voice resonant enough to still the room. "My lady's passions," he said, his eyes never leaving Evelina's, are the very heart of this country's honor. If truth and justice threaten the crown, then the crown has forgotten its duty. But as long as I draw breath, I will defend her cause as fiercely as I defend her name." The room erupted in murmurs, half in admiration, half in alarm. Evelina's heart pounded, her throat tight with unshed tears. He had staked everything, not only for her reputation but for her convictions. In that moment, she understood that his earlier claim at the regent's ball had not been the final word. This was not possession but devotion, not conquest but allegiance. Later, in the carriage that bore them away from the watchful eyes of society, Evelina turned to him, her hand trembling as it sought his. "You have done what I dared not hope," she whispered. "You have made my cause your own." Ashbourne clasped her hand, his eyes fierce yet tender. "Not made it mine, Evelina. Recognized it as ours. There is no chain between us now, save the one we both choose to bear." The city's lamps flickered past, and for the first time since her defiance at the opera, Evelina felt no weight of isolation upon her shoulders. The path before them was fraught with peril, and society's judgment would not be gentle. But beside her sat a man who had ceased to be her pursuer and become her partner, a man who had claimed her not with power but with loyalty.